In this session, we'll explore the characteristics of the Chardonnay grape and the styles of wine it produces. The format of this session will be a little bit different from the other varietal sessions. As we go through background history of the grape and varietal characteristics, pay close attention to how this grape differs from the others, especially in the winemaking process. This will be key to remembering the major styles of Chardonnay and will make a little bit more sense as we continue to go through the content of this session. First, let's look at some background information on the varietal. The history of Chardonnay is quite contested and not as well documented as the grapes we've discussed previously. However, it's generally accepted as a crossing of Sauvignon Blanc and another native French varietal, likely brought from the Romans during expeditions north. Chardonnay is the most widely planted grape in the world. This may come as a surprise as many novice wine drinkers associate Chardonnay with a heavy, buttery wine from Napa Valley. But Chardonnay is the primary grape in some of the most prestigious white wines throughout Burgundy and California, and one of the 3 varietals allowed in Champagne sparkling wines. Due to the wide variety of styles produced from Chardonnay, some of its notability is lost. Without distinct and consistent primary characteristics, it's a little bit harder to intentionally select Chardonnay wines with a good idea of what style of wine is in the bottle. This provides great opportunity for you in the position as an ambassador for our offerings. A glass of Chablis for a guest who prefers crisp, mineral-driven whites is a perfect pour, and likely one that they would not pick off the list at first glance. While Chardonnay wines will certainly require more product knowledge, they will be essential as you continue to grow and embrace the experiential side of our beverage program. The Chardonnay varietal has many different expressions. Chardonnay wines can range from lean and fresh to rich and creamy. Other grapes we've studied, like Pinot Noir, possess a consistent primary profile with regionally specific secondary flavors, meaning you know a bottle of Pinot Noir contains a light-bodied red wine with high acidity and a significant amount of red fruit. By identifying its growing region, you can confidently assume the major secondary flavors and provide an educated description on general profile to the guest. Chardonnay differs in that it lacks a broad primary profile. Chardonnay has been coined as made in the cellar. This implies that the final product in the bottle is largely affected by factors of fermentation, blending, and aging. The primary profile traits we will identify are more general than other varietals, but they'll help us categorize and describe the major styles. The primary flavors are typically in the stone fruit family, dipping into tropical flavors depending on style and region. The significance of fruit in the final style can vary. While still the primary profile characteristics, sometimes the flavors sit as a backdrop to bolder notes. Secondary flavors tend towards savory notes of butter and nuts, or clean minerality and floral aromatics, depending on style. Chardonnay wines typically possess lower acidity, sitting somewhere between low to medium. Chardonnay can range from medium to full-bodied, lean to richly textured, with everything in between. As you continue your training, we'll explore factors affecting style in more detail, but for now, we will review a few key terms that'll help you better understand the major styles, and having a basic understanding of these terms and processes will be useful in navigating Chardonnay offerings at Coppervine. As I mentioned, the format of content for the session will be a bit different. Rather than looking at a few major growing regions and their respective styles of wine, we will first review a few key terms regarding winemaking and then use those as markers to identify style traits and the regions associated. Let's move into factors of winemaking for Chardonnay. Spontaneous fermentation, also called wild yeast, refers to a specific way of approaching fermentation. Typically, the process of fermentation is inoculated with a commercial strain of yeast. Winemakers choose the strain based on how they want the yeast to affect the wine. Spontaneous fermentation has grown in popularity recently. In this process, rather than inciting fermentation with a commercial yeast, winemakers will allow fermentation to begin naturally from materials in the air, bacteria, and things like that. This results in wines with bold and funky flavors, As winemakers have less control over the flavors created, these can be incredibly unique and complex wines. This can be a fun choice for Chardonnay that has less intervention in the cellar. They'll be lighter in body, and those flavors will be illuminated more. Malolactic fermentation. All wines go through an initial fermentation consisting of yeast converting sugar to alcohol, carbon dioxide, and heat. Malolactic fermentation is a secondary fermentation during which malic acid in wine is converted into lactic acid. Malolactic fermentation softens the taste and texture of the wine and adds complexity and character. For whites that don't benefit from malo, such as Riesling or Gewürztraminer, malo is prevented through chilling and filtering and fining. Some producers prefer a crisp style, skipping the barrels and fermenting entirely in temperature-controlled stainless steel tanks to keep the wine lighter and more fruit-driven. Occasionally, the two styles are combined, and tank wine is blended with wine that's gone through malo in the barrel. This results in a wine with both crispness and the nuance of those more savory flavors like butter and toasted oak. This style is popular in regions of Burgundy like Macon. While you don't need to focus on the process or how these things are done, I do want you to be able to identify the creamy or milky texture in the wine and associate the term malolactic fermentation or malo as the cause. Surly aging is a type of aging. Rather than filtering and fining after the initial fermentation, winemakers will allow the wine to age on the spent yeast, or lees. This is mainly done for whites to enrich and enhance the wine. This type of aging imparts bready and yeasty flavors on the wine. Think like brioche or toasted nuts. Oak aging. Chardonnay is typically aged on French oak. French oak translates to flavors of nuts, almond, hazelnut, or caramel, toffee, vanilla, pie crust. The amount of new and used oak and the duration of aging will determine how bold the flavors appear in the wine. Cellar practices like malolactic fermentation and surly aging can serve to illuminate and enhance the flavors imparted from oak aging. And as with all these terms, understand the general process, but focus on identifying the characteristics they create in the wine. This is how you'll become efficient in navigating Chardonnay wines without in-depth background knowledge. Rather than memorizing each tasting note on every product, remembering that the minor wild yeast Chardonnay uses spontaneous fermentation will provide you a general profile description to present to the guest. Now we'll explore some of the most common styles of Chardonnay and loosely tie them to growing regions, but we'll use these terms to kind of build out our profile descriptions. Remember, it's most important to be familiar with the key terms and cellar practices to best develop an accurate profile for each wine. The most recently popularized style of Chardonnay is rich, creamy, and dense in flavor. These are the wines with that thick, milky texture, savory, toasted, and buttery flavors. Malo, surlies, and considerable time on new oak are practices that, in combination, create these big and bold wines. Malo and surlies serve to thicken and refine the structure so that the flavors imparted by oak aging can shine. Fruit isn't the main character for these wines, rather it sits in the background. Rich tones of toasted almond, hazelnut, popcorn, and even caramel or toffee dominate the flavor experience. While these wines are intense and not for everyone, they are great with warm fall flavors, cooler weather, and definitely have a cult following. It'll be essential to know one or two wines with this profile for guests looking for rich and full whites. Napa Valley, Paso Robles are regions typically producing this style, with Macon, a small growing region in Burgundy, France, producing a similar but lighter style with slightly subdued flavors. Next, let's look at lesser known styles of Chardonnay. While it wouldn't be honest to call the lighter styles of Chardonnay old world in style, it's a helpful way to think about it when beginning to study wine. French-style wines tend to be more delicate and nuanced, highlighting terroir and fruit complexity. Stainless steel aging illuminates minerality caused by fossilization in the soil. A lack of oak aging can bring out delicate aromatics and lighter fruit flavors. This works best in cooler regions like France and Italy. A notable wine of this style is Chablis. Chablis refers to a small growing region where the style is so distinct that it has become a quality designation. The flavor profile pairs exceptionally well with seafood, a great pairing for many of our signature dishes like jumbo lump crab deviled eggs and gulffish almondine. It has this crisp and refreshing acidity that's not too sharp, and then that minerality flavor brings out the complexity in seafood. Lastly, let's look at the most simple and approachable style of Chardonnay. As we have discussed, varying cellar practices create an array of different styles in Chardonnay, not bound to specific growing regions. However, there are a growing number of producers making Chardonnay wines with minimal intervention. As the popularity of natural wine continues to grow, more consumers are placing value on varietal typicity. They're looking for simple, fresh wine expressing the quality of the fruit. Chardonnay produced without significant cellar intervention, shorter aging with less new oak, less blending and fining, creates bright and fresh wines, typically medium-bodied with lots of stone fruit and a slightly creamy or chalky texture. Use of stainless steel fermentation and aging in addition to used oak create softer flavors in the wine, bringing out more of the natural stone fruit and tropical fruits. Some of these wines will also feature spontaneous fermentation, as the producer doesn't want to mask the funky and unique flavors with a great deal of oak aging. These wines can be found around the world, but some of the best quality for the price point can be found in up-and-coming regions like Santa Barbara, California, New Zealand, Chile, and throughout Italy. I've detailed our Chardonnay by the glass on this slide. You can refer to your by the glass study guides and reference sheets for tasting notes and producer information. However, I do want to point out our Domaine Gouton, our Chablis by the glass. This is another example of what sets our beverage program apart. Our Corvin Cellar by the Glass list features wines of exceptional quality that aren't typically found on a by the glass list. Pouring a Premier Cru Chablis by the 2.5, 5, and 8 ounce portions is a notable mention on our beverage menu. As you continue to study our by the glass study guides and reference sheets, I would keep notes of things like that as selling points and descriptions for guests. This concludes our Chardonnay session. Please keep any questions or notes you would like to discuss for the tasting workshop, as there'll be time to review and go over content topics. In your Fusion Prep staff materials folder, you'll find supporting documents relevant to this session. These will help you study for the exam as well as continue developing product knowledge.